And I guess before we start to have Dr. Kate the Prima summarize the presentation just to get them started.
Yep. Well, thank you for having me here. Yes, I've been in dietetics now for 24 years, and I have 2 children, so I guess I know firsthand the challenges as well as the pure enjoyment of feeding the family and feeding children. I'm of European descent, and so food is very important to us, but I'm seeing an enormous exponential growth of fussy, picky eating, or known as diet shift here in the Philippines. When and I guess what made me and a colleague of mine, we used to present workshops for parents. This is 9 or 10 years ago, and we started to realise that there wasn't just a one-size-fits-all. There were many different types and different facets of this picky eating, or when a child moves into a diet shift, and it's not just a one-size-fits-all. So I guess the work I'm doing and the information I'm sort of researching, and when I work one-on-one with parents, is trying to work out what style of picky eating it is and to fix the right mechanism or management to that, and just work as a team to facilitate the right outcome for children. Because as I don't know if many of you actually saw some of the early morning presentations, what happens in childhood and those sort of food habits that are laid down early in childhood can really set you up for a healthy adult. So not only in utero, but right through sort of those first year of life and well into that first 10 years can have a huge impact on adult health. So in Australia, obesity and heart disease and diabetes and high cholesterol and hypertension are big problems. And so I did my master's in diabetes, and so I was working with adults, and I thought my time and efforts could be better spent back where it starts. So that's basically where I came to, and I've got 2 children of my own, so I wanted to make sure that I was practicing on them, and they're still alive and well, alive and kicking and growing well. So yeah, that's my big ethos, I guess.
So a lot of Filipinos react well. We all know that every kid goes through this phase. It's unavoidable, but it's manageable. So I think it's a lot of our friends who are going to have some questions. You may raise them. Dr. Kate Prima.
I'd like to ask, you've been working as a dietitian for the past 14 years. How have you seen the way technology, or right now, you see kids 2, 3 years old playing with iPads, mobile phones. How do you see that affect the way that they eat, the way they choose what food to eat or not?
Yeah, I guess what I see in my clinic does ring true with our National Nutrition Survey. So we've got a National Nutrition Survey like yourself, and our most recent one that was released in 2013 basically indicated that children's activity levels had dropped significantly, and I think that's because just fear of the parents letting their children go out and explore by themselves, and we're on a lot smaller blocks, so we have smaller houses because they're more expensive, and we do have a lot more problems with children sitting in front of TV or any sort of electronic device. So Xbox, PlayStation, TV, iPad, and this sort of media is being put into children's hands very early. So when I'm seeing people in the clinic, so that the parent can concentrate, they often give them their iPad for an 8-month-old, so they know how to navigate around. So if they're doing less of this activity, if they're doing less of the physical activity, this is having a bearing on their weight as well. But also I think that there are many people bringing up children these days, so a lot of parents have nannies or help, or the grandmother or grandfather is becoming a huge impact on the child, because many parents are both going out to work, so that the young child is being brought up by other members of the extended family, and so not everyone's on the same page, and grandparents tend to be the treat givers as well. So
there's no one to spoil that.
yes, exactly. So look, I mean, our recommendations for children for activity is at least 3 hours of activity a day, and I think, don't quote me on this exact, but I can send you the exact statistics, but I think it's something like 53% of children don't get that. So they're not getting that activity, and we do have a lot more refined, processed, sugary, sweet foods and salty foods. We call it discretionary foods. and children are having too much of that, especially in our society.
So you could say that picky eating is mostly caused by the environment of the family, or is it also genetic?
We need more research in this area to check genetics, because it's very hard to test genetics because it's parents' recall or grandparents' recall of that child. But I do hear many of my family members will say, my husband doesn't eat broccoli, he's never eaten broccoli as a child, he doesn't eat it now, and my son doesn't eat it. So whether that's genetic because of a taste or something, or whether it's just an environment, like dad doesn't eat it, so the child's not eating it. Exactly. So role modelling, I think, is really important. But as you saw from my presentation, there are more than one different type of picky eating. So it's not just environmental is one of them. The small eater, there's the children who just have very, very small appetites. And, you know, in a family where other children might eat very quickly, they may not get enough, or they're not given enough time, or parents are a bit time poor. So that's the small. There's ones who they're sort of stuck on blended, or parents just not informed as to when to change to a more textured food, and so they're a bit confused as to when to stop blending. So these children don't develop that chewing, or there's ones who just gravitate towards white food. And when a parent is exhausted at 6 or 7 o'clock at night and the child is slightly refusing to try something and says, and then so they'll make a Vegemite sandwich and give them that, so the child then learns to have a tantrum because they don't get used to, you know.
And you could say no to Vegemite.
Sorry?
And you can say no to Vegemite.
Yeah, so there's lots. We do need to sort of see whether there are some statistical significance, whether it is genetic or whether environment has the big, you know, is the big player in the field, or whether it's just we don't have a strategy. We need to maybe put a strategy in place for parents to really know how to, the steps of taking children through starting solids and what they should be achieving at 12 months. You know, something like they should be enjoying the family meal at 12 months. A lot of parents go, oh, I didn't think they could eat family meal at 12 months. So we still need education around that too.
But are there any long-term, any long-term programs that are being done to address the lack of facts, lack of knowledge in that field right now? So there are no long-term projects right now.
There's a couple of the research that's out there is assessing how many picky eaters are there. So things like in the Philippines, there was a study that was done that suggested that 1 in 2 parents believe their children are picky. So that's, you know, there is research that's done asking parents what their perceptions are, but in terms of strategies to help parents, I don't know. Well, I don't know whether there are here in the Philippines, but they're certainly not in Australia.
Really.
No. So GPs often refer to allied health, so either a speech therapist if they need to get chewing, or there's a problem with speech, and then they go to dietitians to try and balance. So we are sort of the second port of call to help and balancing the diet. But I think that really knowing that there is more than just one style of picky eating is important to understand that it needs a different management strategy.
Do you believe that in a lot of cases, the parents are at fault why their children become picky eaters?
It's really, I mean, being a parent myself, the last thing I'd ever want to hear is something that I've got myself into a situation that was my fault. And so I'm very, very careful not to say that it's a fault of the parent or a fault of the system or a fault of the child. What happens is that children, just a routine or a habit can be formed very, very quickly. And parents, you know, if they've got a child that eats everything and a child who doesn't for whatever reason, and it might be that they are a fearful child, and to get both children to bed at a certain time, they may fall into some habits that aren't going to give that child the right nourishment. But they come and see me and say, oh, look, you know, is it my fault? And I say, no, look, there's no fault, there's no blame, let's just try and move forward. Because I think the worst thing that for a parent is to feel that they are at fault. But it's
What are some of the things that parents should not do so that their kids don't become picky eaters? Like, for instance, I've read you should not. Some parents are so afraid to say no. Like, their kids want sweet, like right an hour before lunchtime, so just give it. You know, things like that.
Yeah. Well, look, up until 12 months, children don't need any sugar or any salt added to their food. It's just a blanket. That's something that's built into our dietary guidelines. No salt, no sugar. And then to try and make sure that you get foods from all the different food groups. So just being aware of what the food groups are, and to try and, work out. I guess we have fantastic resources that give parents some ideas of how many serves and from what food group and what a child's friendly serve looks like. So to make sure that they're giving something from each food group, and then work out fairly quickly, oh, we're missing the whole vegetable, there's no vegetable in there. And so rather than just going, oh, well, they'll work it out, they're trying to work out ways to get vegetables into their child's diet. So go and see your GP, go and see your accredited practicing dietitian or your allied health or your paediatrician to get that. So I think parents, they need to not fall into traps of poor eating habits, not to possibly cooking at home is a really big thing. We saw from another lecture that cooking in front of your children and getting your children involved, they get to know foods, they see foods as familiar. Unfamiliar. One crappy, you put that on your mouth, you don't even have to chew that, it just dissolves with the cruscets that we use, which is the same thing. Things like, the pouches, they're all blended up, even if they say for 10 months or 12 months, they've got to come through a little tiny hole like that, and children just squeeze and swallow, so they're not chewing. So parents can get fooled into thinking that they've got the right textures, but it's all the soft beginner stage chewing, which is not going to build up those muscles and get that rotator chewing and the actualizing getting the tongue to pull things from side to side.
I have another question about the use of cups.
Yes.
You said it's more recommended in using bottles.
Yeah.
Why is it? But most of the parents here in the Philippines, they give milk through bottles to their children.
Yep.
Why is the cup more recommended?
Because you have more control, they tend to not drink as much, so they're not filling up on just, cow's milk or whatever. The recommendation in Australia, I'm not quite sure what your recommendation is here in the Philippines, but from 12 months to drop the bottle, because it's more of a comfort that they use. It's not great for the teeth, because children tend to fall asleep on the bottle and then the milk pools around their teeth, so from a dental caries perspective, it's not great. Whereas children who are drinking from a cup tend to clear their mouth a little bit more. And when you're drinking from a cup, either a spout cup or a straw, you bring the whole milk into the mouth, and then they've got to sort of swallow it in like 2 phases, whereas if it's a bottle just lying back, they just sort of swallow and they're not chewing. So, and it's also good for their fine motor skills as well. So the cup's just recommended from 12 months for milk, but also you can put a cup into a 6-month-old child's hands in terms of their water. So they can start drinking from a little cup with some hand size, not with the valve though. The valve is not recommended. It's just like a cup. You can use a spout cup or a straw cup, or even use like a little, it's about about that big with a tiny little, almost like a shot glass. But for a child, it's not like a big thing, like that. It's sort of a little one that they can just start to, because again, with whether it's water or milk, by sort of 10, 12 months, you're trying to get a child to eat first and drink second. So you're trying to get them to chew and get good nourishment from their food, and then top up with something to drink.
Actually, just 2 points. Okay, the first one is not so much a question, but I observed something from your presentation. I'd like to hear more of your opinion about it. You cited a lot of white food earlier,
Yep.
and showed instances on how it can be unhealthy for a child's diet.
Yep.
My thinking, and you cited milk there.
Yeah.
My thinking is, I'm used to thinking that you can never have enough, more than enough milk.
Yes.
So I was quite surprised that too much milk can actually be bad. What's your take on this?
What I was saying with that was, and our guidelines have been changed to represent that. So 10 years ago, probably not even 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, before the new dietary guidelines came out, we were recommending for toddlers 3 serves of dairy-rich sauces every day, whereas a serve is 250 mils of milk, or 40 grams of cheese, or 200 grams of yogurt. So that was 3 serves a day. That has now been reduced to 1.5 because we've got a sort of, that's another category in our culture where we're little milkaholics, or just drinking, replacing meals with milk. So milk is still a fantastic source of protein and calcium and various vitamins as well. But people were replacing whole meals with it. So, and what it is, it's part of the white food eating is white rice, white crackers, white bread, cheese, milk, yogurt. What happens with all of those foods is there's no fibre, there's no iron, there's no zinc, and so you've got those very, very important minerals and roughage that are being lost in the diet. These children tend to be healthy weight for height, but they tend to be low in iron or even anemic, have problems with their bowels and things as well. So, you know, I'm certainly not advocating to take milk out of the diet. That's because it's important, but too much of a good thing, like as I said, too much fruit. Would never take fruit out of the diet, but there are people who have way too much fruit as well. So we just need a little bit of balance coming back in, definitely.
Second point.
Yep.
This is a question. I believe you've observed how Filipino kids eat. What do you think lacks in a Filipino child's diet?
Well, from the research, I think definitely there is still a problem with underweight. So, like, you know, that possibly protein, and as a consequence of that, iron, because anemia is still a problem. And, you know, it's a big one. Even though since 2008 to 2015, 2013, and like the incidence of anemia and iron deficiency is dropping, it's still high at 30%. That's 1 in 3 children is suffering from low iron, which is so important in just, you know, concentration, getting oxygen into the brain, growth, development, you know, so that's still a problem. And underweight is stunting. It's that low, that protein. So just, and that's meat, fish, chicken, tofu, legumes. So maybe even if children or parents, depending on financial status, can't afford meat, fish and chicken, there are some really good legume alternatives, and they just need to be able to have that education to know that as well.
Is there such thing as food that affects child's behavior?
Foods that affects child behaviour, well, there can be, I mean, some of the colours, like tartrazines and some of those preservatives and things have been cited in various papers from around the world. There's still, the jury is still out to exactly how much it actually affects, because quite often, if I get a child that comes to see me, this is just my perspective, if a child comes to see me with behavioural disorders and the parent says, you know, like the teacher has said there's a problem, or they're not, you know, they're not performing particularly well at school, or their behaviour is having an impact on their schooling. If you look at the diet, it's full of refined sort of junk food, I guess, to start with. So is it the colours, the flavours, the, you know, the preservatives, or is it just the fact that they're not eating particularly well? So that's the hard thing, because when you start to redesign their menu plan, I guess the one thing that really affects a child's behaviour is if their blood sugars drop too quickly, and we've all felt that. You know, if you feel hungry, and if you're out there driving at 6:30 on the Manila roads at 6:30 with your blood sugars dropping and someone's beeping the horn, you're not going to sit there and wave nicely. You're going to get cranky. Same with children. Their blood sugars drop and there's an argument in the playground. They're probably going to have not the behaviour that you're looking for, but it could be because they're just not eating regularly enough. They don't have protein with the meal to give them that low GI. They're not got a full balanced diet. They may not be sleeping particularly well. They might be a bit, you know, constipated. So all of these things can have an effect on their behaviour. So before we jump to solicits, amines, preservatives, colours, flavours, we all go back to, you know, eating food that you find on the outside of the supermarket rather than all the processed foods on the inside. Start with that first before we brand a child that they're sensitive to a
because my son has ADHD, and they say that because of the food and the environment.
Yep.
So I eliminated already the sugary,
Yes.
the sweets, but still the same behavior.
Yep. Does he eat, like, what I tend to say for parents like yourself is try and get them to eat every 2.5 hours. Make sure he's eating something every 2.5 hours, and make sure there's protein and carbohydrate at the same time to try and protein delays stomach emptying, so it tends to make you feel fuller for longer and give you a slow release energy rather than in little bodies just dumping things in the system. So trying that sort of thing. But a lot of people say, oh, after a party, you know, we get home and they're just crazy, or in the car they're crazy and they're just, you know, but the thing is, they've been at a party, so their adrenaline's up, their excitement level's up, they've probably had lollies, but they've had lots of running around, and then you tether them in a car with a belt, and that's why they go a bit crazy. So we don't know, is it a few lollies that they might have had is causing a problem. But there definitely are children who do react to some of those colours, the colours.
This Dr. Kate, in terms of family dynamics,
Yes.
how can we create that good habit formation when it comes to the table manners, and when it comes to the kids forming their habits of healthy eating? How can families and parents start that habit?
I guess the number one thing is for children to have, you know, healthy eating habits, a healthy attitude towards food, some table manners, and to understand how the you know, the food engagement in food is they have to copy someone, and they need to copy someone is copying, now whether it's mum or dad or grandma or grandpa or siblings, or you know, if they're at daycare. Many people say to me, oh, when they go to daycare or childcare or preschool, they eat everything and they sit down and they do what they're told. That's because the rules have been set up very quickly in those environments, and they copy, or you know, by example. It's called mirroring. So you actually you mirror what you see. So if I started to hysterically laugh now, you would all laugh because you're mirroring what I won't, but you're mirroring what I'm doing. It's the same. If Dad, you know, eats with a knife and fork and eats slowly and discusses the day's activities, the child's going to start learning that. But outside influences, if the family all sit down in front of the television, or if the family is, you know, like a little bit, you know, like we call sort of like blended families, like, you know, Dad might be going off to a sport, or there's someone, if it's a bit disruptive, you're probably going to find that's going to impact the way they learn. So good role modelling is fantastic. Having a balanced diet yourself as a parent is going to be the first step. And you know, dads tend to have more of an influence than we realise, because they're called the transient parent that comes in and out of the house. And what we do as mums, we go, oh, Dad's home, so here's this amazing person that comes through. Foods children will say no to, but familiar foods they're more conducive to trying. So cooking at home, leading by example, being a good role model. I mean, a lot of times, and this isn't a fault of parents, but if they're working late and they stop in and they get takeaway all the time and they're not cooking, or if they don't eat vegetables or salad, they can't expect their children to eat vegetables and salad. And in our last National Nutrition Survey, I think it was 80+% of our children were not getting vegetables, the right amount of vegetables in their diet, but neither were the adults. So I looked at the children's statistics and the adults. So if the adults are not getting it, it's obviously not in the home, or they're not eating it. So then it's not, they're not role modelling that, or you know, mirroring that to the children. So we need to be good role models, and just setting up a good routine. And look, it's, you know, I do say to parents, it's okay to say no. And parents are very scared about letting their children starve. They think something's better than nothing. I go, no, they won't starve. As long as you provide good food, let them choose. So if you withhold all food, that's not good. But if you say, look, this is what it is, that's it, you know, and help them, don't overdo the serving size. So reasonable serving size and a reasonable time. Don't delay the time of the meal. Trying to get, I mean, I guess I love the area that I'm in, because I've lived a lot of the problems that parents have said, you know, picking up a child late, trying to get them home, and then feeding a 4-year-old by 6:30 at night. Their appetite has switched off. So I'd often give parents some solutions. We'll try and feed them at 4:30 in the afternoon. You know, if they're at daycare, send them with dinner so that when their appetite is richest, rather than delaying. It's like trying to delay your dinner till 9 p.m.
How important is routine?
100%. It's one of the most important things. Children thrive on routine and thrive on boundaries. I think that's really routine, timing of the meals. You know, if they've got a little area in the house somewhere that's their chair and table, they know that they have to sit there, or if they're a toddler, they have to sit in a high chair. It's just I guess the rules of childhood. Children appreciate those, and you know, I've seen firsthand within my clinic that it works a lot better if they are routine rather than, you know, just being a bit haphazard with timing and foods produced.
Is it okay?
So dad doesn't have any veggies or salad or doesn't eat. Okay, the child tends to role model a bit from dad.
You mentioned that there are different kinds of picky eaters. Is it possible for one child to have different kind of picky eating?
Absolutely, and you can have more than one type of picky eating. So you can be a fearful child that just is the white food eater.
Is it harder to manage these kinds?
Yeah, and I think what parents really appreciate is a menu plan. It's just say, okay, this is the plan. This is where we're at. This is possibly why, and these are the steps. So rather than making a child sit at a table for an hour who doesn't want to eat their meal, it might be because they're fearful of the food. So you put some familiar foods on there and maybe one unfamiliar food, and you know, some of them might pick it up and just chew that one because it's a really easy thing to do rather than a whole plate of unfamiliar food. But you often find in a family like Kieran and Alex have two older siblings, and the two older siblings are absolutely fine. They eat everything, there's no problem at all. These twins have the picky eating. So you often find in a family there'll be just one. And the problem is everyone focuses on this one and forgets the one that's actually doing okay. So I tend to change that around and get parents to focus on the child that's eating well and just like verbally rewarding them, like, wow, that's fantastic, really good, to try and encourage the little one to conform.
In terms of addressing picky eating, it takes time, right?
Yeah.
But what's the best? Some moms, they feel the pressure to address it right away. That's why they feel a lot of gimmicks when it comes to the presenting food to their kids. And what's the best way to fill in those nutritional gaps?
Well,
Right away.
yeah. So when my steps are, when I first see a client, like it might be a referral, you see what the information you're given, you take sort of like a full diet history, so it gives you an idea of what they're bringing in and where the gaps are. And if the gaps are, say they're getting no fibre, you might have to use a fibre supplement. If they're getting no iron, no zinc, you need to find a supplement that's going to provide that as part, like, you know, so in Australia we have like toddler formulas and junior formulas and things, and like Akiva here, for example, will fill in those gaps because it provides iron and zinc and vitamins and minerals whilst you work on the behaviour. Because you can work on the behaviour, but still their underlying problem is their nutrition is falling further and further behind. So you need to fill in those nutritional gaps with a supplement, and you know, you can use that either as a drink as part of their dairy or incorporate. Like I get parents to make white sauces, you know, things like we have little muffins and little pikelets and things that are part of the core food groups, but instead of just using plain cow's milk, you've used a supplement as part of that. So you're fortifying the food whilst you're working on behaviour and changing strategies. But it's one thing at a time, changing things slowly and giving time frames so a parent knows what they're working towards and doesn't feel pressured and anxious.
So when you supplement it with milk, is there a best time to give that milk? Is it during the day, or is it whenever the child drinks the milk?
Yeah, so when not just to, I guess I'm just using the Australian guidelines, for example, we have 1.5 serves of dairy every day. So if that might be 2 little 125 cups of milk with their lunch and their dinner. So they eat first and they drink second, that will give them 1, and then they might get some cheese or some yogurt, and you can mix the supplement into the yogurt as well. It doesn't all dissolve through. So it's part of their dairy food group.
Yeah.
So not just to be given, you know, ad hoc, but sort of at the end of their lunch or their dinner, or it might be poured on their cereal in the morning. So So as part of their dairy.
Until what age should the child drink milk?
I mean, adults still drink milk.
Because some Filipino, like here,
Yeah.
stop their kids drinking milk about 6 years old or 8
Oh,
years
do they?
old.
Oh. I still like my children still make
Because
smoothies.
they say they're already eating, so they
Right.
don't need.
But it's still like milk is still part of the dairy food group. So you know your hang on.
Pinggan.
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 Pinggan. No wonder everyone laughed because it was just like, what is that? Sorry, your plate. Your plate has your rice, pasta, potato, your meat, chicken, fish, your fruit, and your vegetables. So that's what a dinner plate looks like, but it doesn't actually contain the dairy component, whereas your pyramid does. So that's why the plate is good for, because I mean we haven't had dairy here, but that's okay because we've had our meal. But our pyramid still says that I need some sort of calcium-rich dairy food in my day for bone strength, for protein, etc. So it's still important. It is still important for children because up till, I mean, our guidelines, I think it's a 15-year-old boy still needs 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day, and without milk, you're not getting 1,000 milligrams of calcium coming in. So we don't recommend to stop, consuming milk or milk dairy products at all. And it's so important because we've got a high degree of osteopenia and osteoporosis in our elderly population. So bone strength sort of is important up to about building bones up until about the age of 21, and then it starts
to decline.
Yes.
So do you have any other questions for Dr.
Have you had any problems with your kids as to when it comes with food or nutrition when they were kids, when they were really small? Was there any instance where they preferred something and it's not really good, and how did you solve it?
Yeah. Well, Rose would not try new things. She wasn't a fearful child because she didn't come out of bed, she didn't show. She's still, now she's more like, my son will just jump in and do anything, and he'll go, yeah, that's all. Whereas she's sort of a little bit like, am I going to like that? Am I get, so she has those little bit of, those phobias and things. But to get her to try something new was difficult. So I used to set up some bowling pins on the kitchen bench, and when they both have a bite, they'd have a bowl. So I was still there, interacting, whatever, and Jack would have a bite, and so he'd get a bowl, and so she'd put her little hand out. She would have been about maybe 18 months, and it was something to encourage her. So it was a game within there, but it wasn't like, you don't eat this, you're in trouble, and you go to the naughty corner. So it wasn't negative. It was like, well, you've got to have a bite to get this bowl. So yeah, it wasn't all smooth sailing. And, I'd come home and go, oh, she's hard work, and I was going to say, well, just keep at it.
Yeah.
So, and she will flatly refuses to eat roast pumpkin. Doesn't like it. It makes her gag. But recognise that everyone has things they don't like, and some things they do. You don't have to eat everything.
Yes.
I hate goat's cheese. And many of you don't like Vegemite. I like Vegemite. So, it's okay not to like everything, but when a whole food group is avoided, that's when it's problematic.
What are some of the things that parents can do to raise a foodie, a child who loves food? Like I've seen parents, like they let their toddlers say touch the food so that they would see how the texture of the food. Some of them they include the kids in the food preparation. Any other suggestions?
Yeah, so just expose them to as many different things as possible. So I try to say, I've come up with a little theory of 15 different foods a day, 15 different types. Now, this doesn't mean 15 different meals. It could be a pea is a different thing, a carrot's a different thing. So just keep, exposing variety, because children have got to see a food 10 to 15 times before they recognise it as normal. So, but most parents give up after 1 or 2 times. They go, well, they're not going to eat it, so I'm not going to keep preparing it because it's just wasting food. So try and expose them to as many foods as possible. Lead by example, so be a good role model, eat all the same foods. Let them play, let them experiment. My sister's just had a baby, and I'm 47, so she's 44, so she's an older mum, but she cleans up and, makes you know, Ellie's not allowed to throw things on the floor and whatever. And I said, let her, you know. So I got peanut butter and all over her face. And, oh, I mean, she's got to feel and touch and smell. I think we're living in that sort of, you know, wipe them sterile. And they can't explore. So let your children explore, expose them to food, shut down, you know, environmental influences that are not going to really, you know, help us. If there was a TV playing here now, we wouldn't be interacting like this. So, you know, those outside influences, and not everything has to be a rush. Parents are like, you know, the 2-year-old's got to be fed because we've got to take the 5-year-old to dancing, and then we've got to pick up the 7-year-old from soccer, and then we've got to do this. Simplify our lives. You know, I think my doctor friend I work with says, if you're going to eat, eat. If you're going to talk, talk. And if you're going to walk, walk. Don't do them all together.
I think that's a good last word.
Thank you.
Okay, we have representatives from NDOT who will be joining us just to share some local insight about the eating issue. But alright, I think
I have to